everybody, and welcome to the second to last performance of the Lit Weekend, and a very special performance we've got for you this afternoon. This is Jan Blake and her second performance of the Lit Weekend. For those of you who don't know Jan, Jan is a long-time friend of both Macclesfield and the Lit Festival. Jan is an international storyteller. She's been telling stories all over the world and from all over the world for over 25 years, although you might not quite believe that when you see Jan. We've just been talking about age. Jan specialises in stories from Africa, the Caribbean and Arabia, and she has a really well-earned reputation for being a very dynamic storyteller and very generous with her storytelling as well. So things are slightly different this afternoon to what we'd anticipated. We were meant to have a workshop this morning, and unfortunately we ran into a couple of issues that meant things didn't happen quite as we'd planned. So what we've actually got is a solo performance this afternoon of Jan, which is just as wonderful. And I will hand over, no further ado, now to Jan. And I just want to say, and we'll talk again very briefly at the end, but just a massive thank you, Jan, for being involved with Lit this year and for the work that you've done with us. So I will hand over now.
Hello, good afternoon. As Diana just explained, my name is Jan Blake. I'm a storyteller, and actually I've been telling stories for over 34 years. All over the world, but mainly, as Diana says, Africa, the Caribbean and Arabia. And the story that I would have done with the families today at the workshop is called The Girl and the Snake. So I'm just going to give you a telling of that without the sound support, okay? Now, I can't hear you, but I'm going to trust you that when I say crick, you will answer crack, okay? Crick, crick, crick. Once upon a time, in a small village in Kenya, there was a brother and sister born to a mother and father. Nobody quite understood why, but there was a tension between this brother and this sister. The girl, she was kind-hearted, she was high-spirited, she was a joy to be around. The boy, though, he was quite surly, quite sulky. And he used to bully his sister mercilessly, and nobody knew why, because mother and father loved them both exactly the same way. No one was given preferential treatment. No one was loved more than the other. No one received more gifts than the other. But there was something about this boy, and it wasn't just the mother and father who discussed it. It was the whole community who discussed it, because his behavior ran counter, was against what the community believed. They believed in living together harmoniously. And they would often sit round him and remind him of all his blessings, but this didn't seem to affect the boy at all. And they grew. The father was a farmer, and he would go out into the field and his boy would go with him. And he would come back and the boy would come back with him. And the father passed on everything he knew about the farm to his son. And they grew older. The wife passed first. She died, and the father, the husband with a heavy heart, he buried his wife in the ground, and the whole community sang songs. And they grew older. The father now went to the farm less often. He would often send the boy on his own, and he would sit on the veranda of his huge house on his farm. And the boy would come back and report about this and that, what needed doing, what was in good shape and what wasn't. And the father would sit and watch. And they grew older. And by the time the girl and the boy were 16 and 17, the father was too old to even get out of his bed. And so the boy would come back and report to his father where he lay. And time passed and time passed. And the old man soon was too old and too ill to even lift his head from his pillow. So he called his son and he called his daughter. And he looked into their faces and he said, I'm not long for this world. And when I die, there are only two things I can offer you, my possessions or my blessings. What will you have? And the boy said, I want your possessions. I've worked hard on this farm. I want your possessions. Everything that I can see in this house, outside of this house, I want it. And the father said, my boy, you've worked hard, it's yours. Which means, my daughter, that all I can offer you are my blessings. And he laid his hands on his daughter's head and he blessed her. He blessed her. He wished her all the good in the world. He wished that no harm would ever come to her, and that if harm ever did come to her, that she would find a place to rest and to heal and to flourish once more. He kissed his daughter on the forehead, and then he turned his face to the wall, closed his eyes, and he breathed his last breath. And the whole community came to the house. And the elder women, they washed his body from head to toe. And then they wrapped his body in cloth. It's called shrouding. They shrouded his body. And the men, they dug the grave. And the women and the men, they brought the body out of the house singing and singing and singing, singing of his life, singing of a blessing that he was to the village. And they put his body in the ground and they covered him up. And then the women, they went to prepare the food. And the men, they sat in circles and they talked about their good friend who they'd just lost. But the brother, the son, he was already emptying the house. He'd gone off and he brought a horse and cart and he was filling the back of the cart with all his possessions. And he was instructing his sister, yes, that too, bring it out of the house. And so the girl, she began to bring the possessions out of the house as her brother had been instructing her. And some of the women, they came forward and they put their hands on their hips and they said, what are you doing? Your father's not even cold in the ground. What are you doing? Leave off with this nonsense. Come and celebrate your father's life. I'm not staying here, he said. My father's gone. I'll send workers to harvest everything that's on the farm when it's time to harvest, but I'm going from this place. I found myself a new wife, a new life, and I will live there. And then one of the men stepped forward and he said, what is this? You can't leave your sister with nothing. She didn't ask for possessions. I asked for possessions. She got her blessings. Let's see if she can eat blessings. Let's see if she can sleep on her blessings. And then one of the men, one of the bigger men, stepped forwards and he said, you will not leave your sister with nothing. And he said, very well, I'll give her something. And he climbed up on the back of the cart and he pulled out an old cooking pot. It was full of holes. It was rusty. And he threw that down on the ground. He said, there, she can have that. No one can say that I haven't been generous. I'm taking what is rightfully mine. And he sat at the front and he kicked the horse and he was gone. And the women in the village, they made that sound of disgust and derision. They were not happy with this young man. He did not behave the way people of this village were supposed to behave. Let him go, they said. And then they all surrounded the sister. As she stood there, aghast, shocked, and confused by her brother's behavior, as she had always been. The blacksmith stepped forward and he picked up the pot and he said, I will fix this pot, don't worry. And straight away he went to his forge and he heated up the fire and he pumped the bellows and that fire was hot, 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 hot. And he went to work. And when he finished, that pot looked as good as new. And he brought the pot to her. He said, here, at least you'll have something to cook in. And then one of the fishermen said, don't worry, tomorrow you will have fish in that pot. And one of the hunters said, don't worry, the day after that you will have meat in that pot. And the women said, we will pull vegetables from our kitchen garden and we will fill your pot, don't worry. But the girl, she didn't want to take charity. She was embarrassed. So she insisted on helping where she could. So she would take care of the children. She would plait the girls' hair, or she would sing songs to them, or tell them stories at night while their mothers were busy. Or she would go out with the farmers and try and help them on their farm. She wasn't very good, but they were grateful for her help. She would take the washing from the women and go to the river and wash the clothes with them, sing the songs with them. And time passed. And that pot was never empty. And even though she cried sometimes because she missed her mother and she missed her father, that pot was never empty. And her heart was full of joy and gratitude. But in his house, in his village with his wife, the brother was still dissatisfied. One night, he tossed and he turned and he turned and he tossed. His wife said, what's the matter with you? And he said, I can't sleep. And even though he didn't tell her why, he knew what he would do. The next day, as the sun was setting, he set off for the village where he used to live with his sister. And the people saw him coming. When they saw him coming, they said, "What is this now? What calamity has this one brought now?" And they watched him as he walked to the house. His sister was sitting inside the house. She'd just made a meal. She was hungry. Her mouth was watering. She'd poured the food into a pot. Some was left and some was in the calabash bowl, just like this one that she was going to eat from. And as she dipped her hands into the calabash bowl to eat the food, a shadow crossed her. She looked up and she saw her brother in the doorway. And to be honest, she was happy. She jumped up and she said, "My brother." And she made to hug him. And he said, "What are you doing? I haven't come for your hugs. I haven't come for my brother. I want my pot." "But I've just cooked." "I want my pot," he said. And he took the food that was left in the pot and he tossed it to the ground. And because he was cruel, he kicked over the calabash bowl as well. And she said, "But why?" And he said, "Don't ask me why. Ask your blessings. See if you can eat blessings." And he left. The villagers came, they looked into the house and they saw what the brother had done. "We don't know what spirit is on this one," they said, "but don't worry, all will be well. Tomorrow, all will be well." She curled up in a ball and she went to sleep. Or she tried to go to sleep. But you know what it's like? You sleep for a bit, you wake up, her stomach was churning, she was anxious, she couldn't understand what was happening. And as she sat there, tears streaming down her cheeks, trying to understand her life, she saw something. It seemed to be shining in the distance on the ground. So she went over to it and she pulled it out. It was a pumpkin seed, one solitary pumpkin seed. And she was hungry. And she wanted to shell that pumpkin seed and put it in her mouth, but then she thought, I'll plant it. I'll plant this pumpkin seed and I'll water this pumpkin seed and I'll have something that I grew for myself to eat. And she went outside and she put the pumpkin seed in the ground. She watered it with her tears. She cried and then she went back into the house and she went to sleep. The next morning, she wasn't awoken by the cockerel that strutted around the village. She was woken by the sound of the people gasping. "Come out here," they said, "come and see, come and see, come and see." So she roused herself, she rubbed the sleep from her eyes, she went outside. There were pumpkins everywhere. She couldn't believe her eyes. "What is this?" she said. "This," said one of the women, "this is your father's blessings. Look, it can only be your father's blessings. You are a blessed child. You are a lucky one. Don't worry, anything your brother does will come to nothing." And she began to harvest the pumpkins. She harvested the pumpkins, she put them in a big basket, like the one that you can't see that's up there. In the basket, she put the basket on her head and she went off to market. And she sold every single pumpkin. And all the other pumpkin sellers, they were ignored that day. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Hers were the sweetest, most delicious pumpkins. In fact, the pumpkin sellers came to her to ask if she could buy some of their pumpkins. And they would split the profits with her if they sold enough. And so she had a nice business, growing these pumpkins, selling these pumpkins to other pumpkin sellers, selling them for herself. Her life began to increase. Her heart was full of gratitude. She loved her father's blessings. One day, a woman came to her market stall and she said, "You know, I've heard about these pumpkins far and wide. I thought I'd come and try them myself." And then she took a closer look and she said, "Your face is so familiar to me." "I know why," she said. You must be my husband's sister. I've heard of you. He doesn't speak very kindly of you, but look at you. You're shining. How can it be that he doesn't love you? You look so similar to my husband. My goodness me." And then the girl said, No, you can't pay. Please, these pumpkins are my gift to you. Take them. Take these pumpkins and give my love to my brother. I miss him so. And so the wife went home and she told her husband that she'd seen his sister and she couldn't understand why he was so cruel about her when she was the sweetest girl. And clearly everybody loved her. She was doing very well, she said. "She does well, your sister. You should be proud of her." That night again, he tossed and he turned and he tossed. He could not sleep, thinking of his sister, thinking that she was doing well, and he decided to put an end to it. The very next day, he jumped on his horse and he rode to the village. And once more, the villagers eyed him. He's back, they said. Let's see what he tries to do now. The sister was sitting in the house counting her profits. She'd finished her house now. She didn't need his possessions. She was counting out her money, and the shadow fell across her face, and there he was, her brother. And inside, her stomach was churning, but she put on a brave face and she said, "My brother, I'm so happy to see you. Your wife came to the market yesterday. It was good to meet her. I wish I could have been at your wedding." "I don't want to talk to you," he said. "I've come for what's mine." "But you took everything. The workers came, they took the harvest. I don't understand. What else could be yours?" He said, "These pumpkins. If you found a pumpkin seed anywhere on this property, it was mine, which means these pumpkins are mine." And then he began to uproot the pumpkins. And that which he couldn't carry, he began to stamp into the ground. And she said, "No, you can't do this." He took out his knife and he said, "Move. I'm going to cut the vines." She said, "You can't do this, my brother." He said, "Move." And she held on to two of the vines. And she said, "You can't touch them. You cannot. This is all I have." He said, "Move. I'm going to cut." She said, "My brother, can you be so cruel?" He said, "Move." She was determined. It's the first time she ever stood up to him. She said, "No, do your worst." And he lifted that knife and slack, he cut. He cut through her hand, clean off, through the vines of the pumpkins. He uprooted everything, stamped on that which he couldn't carry once more, and was gone. The villagers, they shouted hot words after him, but he didn't hear because he didn't care. The blacksmith came with a hot poker and he cauterized the wound. And then one of the women, she wrapped the wound. And one of the other women said, "Come and live in my house. He wouldn't dare to enter my house and treat you the way he treated you today." And she said, "I can't stay here. I can't stay here. If he comes back, he'll kill me." And she began to run. She ran, leaving all her sorrows behind. She ran into the heart of the forest. She came to the tallest tree. She climbed that tallest tree with great difficulty. Have you ever tried to climb a tree with one hand? She climbed and she climbed, hooking her arm over and over until she was at the very, very top of the tree. And there she sat and she wept. She wept out all her grief and all her sorrow. She wept. A young prince was traveling through the forest. He and one of his workers, one of his servants, they were walking together. And he just so happened to sit under a particular tree, a very tall tree in the middle of the forest. And as he was sitting there, he felt water, something wet falling on his face. He said, "Is it raining?" The servant said, "Sire, you saw the sun is high in the sky." "Then what is this water?" he said. "Climb up and see." "All right," said the servant, and he climbed the tree up to the very top. And when he saw that girl, he was so stunned by her beauty. He came back down and he said, "Sire, I have just seen the most beautiful girl in the world sitting in the top of that tree." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "Go and see for yourself." And so the prince, even though he was of royal blood, he decided to climb the tree. Up, he climbed until he was at the very top of the tree. And the girl, when she saw the prince, she covered her face. And she said, "Go away, don't look at me, don't talk to me." And he said, "What brings you here? Why are you so distressed?" And she just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And he tried to get her to come down from the tree. He used soft, coaxing words to try and get her out of the tree, but she was crying so hard, her body racked with sobs. And so he just sat there and waited. He waited until she cried all her tears away. And then he said, "Please come down. I'm worried that you'll fall. Please, I can help you. I'm a prince. I have means. Please, come down. Please." She looked into his face and she saw kindness there. And so she took his help as he helped her down the tree. And then she, and the servant went back to the palace. When he got to the palace, he told the servants to wash her and dress her in the finest clothes, because you know what's happened. As soon as he saw her in that tree, he knew that he had to be with her forever. His heart was full of love. And as the servants were preparing her, he went in to see his mother and father, the king and the queen. And the king and the queen, especially the queen, because mothers know, don't they? When she saw that look in her son's face, she said, well, what's happened? Tell me. And he said, mother, father, I've come to tell you, you've chastised me a lot about not choosing a wife. I've come to tell you that finally, I knew it, said the mother, I knew it. You want to marry. Who is the girl? Who are her family? Tell me. I want to know everything. Which royal household are they from? And he said, she's not exactly from a royal household. Oh, said the father. Then where is she from? I don't know, he said. I found her in a tree in the middle of the forest. He's finally gone mad, said the queen. He's finally gone mad. You have brought to us a girl you met in a tree in the middle of the forest. Who are her people? He said, I don't know. And you have to know one other thing. She's disfigured. What do you mean disfigured, said the king. Well, she has, one of her hands is missing. I don't know how it happened. She won't tell me. But this is what you will have to accept. And the queen said, no, we can't accept a stranger in a tree with only one hand. Are you mad? Is he mad? She said to the king. And at that moment, the great doors opened and in she came, dressed in all her finery, looking so beautiful, looking to all intents and purposes like a princess. And the king and the queen, when they saw her, their mouths fell open and their hearts softened. And she was accepted. And there was a wedding. Eating, drinking, dancing, ululating. 9 months later, a child was born. More celebration, more ululation. The king and the queen were delighted. Their only son had a wife who was so beautiful and gentle-spirited, and a beautiful grandson. The firstborn child was a son. The heritage of that family would live on because a son was born, and they were happy. 6 months of joy and happiness with this child. But princes sometimes have to go away. Princes sometimes have to go on journeys and go around their kingdom, and sometimes they're away for a long time. So it was with a heavy heart that the princess said goodbye to her husband. Do you have to go? She said. He said, yes, but you'll be all right. Whatever ails you, whatever worries you're running away from, they won't find you here. My mother and father, they will take good care of you. He embraced his wife. He kissed the son that she had tied on her back, jumped on his horse, and he was gone. One day, she was in the palace grounds. A man had come. A man who had once lived with a wife, who had once had a sister, who had once been so cruel that when his wife heard of what he had done, she threw him out of the house and refused to see him again. A man who'd taken to wandering. And as he'd come to this palace to try and find some form of work in the palace kitchens, he saw her. He saw her in the palace grounds, dressed in her finery. He saw her with a child on her back, his sister, accepted into this royal household. His heart turned to stone in his chest, and he demanded to see the king. And so he was taken in, and he bowed before the king and the queen. He said, Majesties, I've come because I fear for the kingdom. What do you mean, said the king. It's a matter of national security. What do you mean, said the queen. What does he mean? The one who is in the garden now with the child on her back. I assume that she is a princess. Yes, said the king. She is the wife of our son and the mother of our grandchild. I knew it. I feared as much, he said. What do you mean? What do you mean, said the queen. She's a witch, he said. I know, because I was the one who was charged with killing her. She put spells on mothers and took their children. But then she spelled me, and I couldn't bring myself to kill her. She offered me her hand. She has a hand missing, does she not? Yes, said the queen, she does. I'm the one who chopped off that hand, as proof to the people of the village that she was indeed dead, but she ran. And now I see that she found herself here, and she's inveigled her way into your lives. Send her away. And the child, don't keep the child, because the child is a spawn of witchcraft. She's bewitched you all, and you will suffer. Your son is under her spell. Send her away. And the queen, she said to her husband, what shall we do? What shall we do? He said, well, the story sounds plausible, and she had never told us why she lost her hand. I think we should listen to this young man. I think, thank you, he said, thank you for bringing us this news. And the servants were sent out into the garden with long sticks, and they drove her out, she and the child, and they gave no explanation. She said, but my husband. They gave no explanation. They drove her out through the gates, and the gates were locked against her. And that was that. And once more, she was running. She came to a lake in the middle of the forest, and she sat there by the lake. She untied the child, and she laid the child on the cloth, and she put her head in her hands, and she wondered. She wondered if her father's blessings had indeed been a curse. And as she sat there, she heard, save me, save me, save me from my brother. And when she looked, she saw a small snake wriggling towards her, and in pursuit, a huge snake in the distance. So she quickly lifted her skirts, and the snake disappeared under the skirts. The huge snake came out, and he said, have you seen my sister? And she said, I saw a small snake go in that direction. Thank you, said the snake, and off it went. She waited a while, and she lifted her skirts once more, and the small snake emerged. And the small snake said, as you have saved me from the sun, so I will save you from the rain. Come with me to the snake kingdom. Now, strange things have been happening ever since she entered the forest, but she decided to take a chance on this snake. And so she went to pick up her child. But when she did, she saw that the cloth on which she'd laid the child had rolled into the water, and the child was not there. And she looked everywhere. She said, my baby, where's my son? Where's my baby? And she jumped into the water, and she tried to find him, but she couldn't. And she emerged sopping wet, tears streaming down her face, bemoaning her life, when the snake said, try with your other hand. And the girl, she looked at the snake and she said, are you mocking me? Are you mocking me? No, said the snake. Try with your other hand. And there was something about the sincerity in the snake's voice that made her dive back into the water, and this time try with what had once been a hand. And she searched in the water, and her fingers brushed something. Fingers on both hands. And as she lifted the child out of the water, she saw that her hand had been restored. And the child was crying, and she was kissing her child and thanking the snake. And the snake said, I told you, as you saved me from the sun, so I will save you from the rain. Follow me. And so mother and child followed the small snake to the snake kingdom. The gates of the snake kingdom were made from snakes, and when they saw the snake approach, they moved out of the way. And as she walked down the corridors in the snake kingdom, the ceiling was encrusted with jewels, and the ground was encrusted with jewels, the walls encrusted with jewels, gold, silver. This was a snake princess. And the snake princess took the new princess to her mother and father and told them everything that had happened. And the snake king and queen, they said, you are welcome. You are welcome. And we thank you for saving our daughter's life. Should you need anything, you need only ask. And so for another 6 months, the princess lived there with her child. And everything she needed was provided for her, was brought to her. But when her son began to walk, stumble around, when he began to say, da, 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 she knew it was time to leave. So she found her friend, the snake, and she explained, I can't stay here. My son is growing. Somehow I have to get back to the palace, and I have to present him to my husband. And the snake took her once more to the snake king and the snake queen. And the snake king and queen, they said, we are sad to see you leave, but we understand. And then the snake queen spat something out. It was a ring. And she said to the princess, should you need any possessions, rub the ring and ask, and it will be given. So the princess took the ring and she put it on her finger. The king of the snakes spat out a small silver box, and he said, should you need anything, rub the box, and all that you need to nourish yourself, all foods will appear. And she took that box, she tied the baby on her back, she took the box into the cloth, she said goodbye and thank you to the snakes, and she left, making her way back to where she had lived as a wife and as a princess. Now, her husband, the prince, had been lied to by his parents. They'd made up some story about the princess and the child becoming ill and dying of a disease. And they even went as far as making fake graves. And every day, the prince would go and mourn at the graves of his wife and son. The princess thought it best not to go straight to the palace. She had the ring, she had the box, she knew what she would do. So she rubbed the ring and she said, give me a palace with furniture and servants and everything a princess and a prince would need. And the palace appeared. And then she rubbed the box and she said, give me a feast, a banquet fit for a king, a queen, a prince, and a princess. And the table suddenly became heavy laden with delicious things to eat and delicious things to drink. Anything you can imagine was on that table. The prince was praying at the graves of his wife and his child when a huge palace appeared right there opposite the graves. He couldn't believe his eyes. And of course, his curiosity got the better of him. He left immediately and he went to the gates of that palace. And the servant said, come in, sir. We've been expecting you. Me? Yes, please come in. And so he entered the palace. And he saw a table in a great vestibule, a great room, heavy laden with delicious things to eat. He saw a woman dressed in finery, and he saw a toddling child. And the toddling child came running towards him. And the prince, he picked up the child and he looked at this child. He recognized this child's face because he used to look into it every day. The face of the one he loved. And he looked up again at the woman in fine clothes and he walked closer. He held the child close. And he said, my wife, they told me you were dead. And she said, my husband, please sit. I have much to tell you. And he sat down with the child on his lap and listened to the story that his wife had to tell him. The story of how she lived in a village with a brother who was cruel and how he treated her so badly. And that was how she'd lost her hand and how she'd been cast out by his parents, probably because of some bad words dropped into their ears, poisonous words, and that she'd almost lost their son and regained their son and regained her hand, and that she was not a witch, but that she had been wronged. But now she'd been restored. She'd come back, and she hoped that he would accept them both into their lives. She said, I want to speak to your parents. Please fetch them. He gave her the child and out he went. And he came back with two confused parents and one advisor. An advisor who had inveigled his way into the house, into that royal household. One who had dropped poisonous words into the ears of a king and a queen. He didn't recognize his sister at all. But there was something about that child that was running around. The princess stood up and she welcomed her in-laws, and they were so ashamed when they saw her. And they were so ashamed when they heard her story. And the king, he looked at the advisor, who you probably have guessed was the brother. And he said, why would you do such a thing? And the prince, he drew his sword and she said, no. He's my brother. He's my brother. You can't. Very well, he said. If I can't kill him, then we'll do this. And he called her servants And he told them to come back with long staves, long sticks. And they drove that brother out of the palace, and the gates were closed against him. And he ran. He found himself sitting by a lake, bemoaning his fate, complaining about why he was given possessions and why he should have been given blessings. And at that moment, a small snake came. Save me, save me, save me from my brother. And he kicked the snake. Leave me alone, he said. And behind that snake was a huge snake. Have you seen my sister? And before he could open his mouth and say anything, the snake had already opened its mouth and and there he was, being digested in the digestive juices of that snake. Whilst his sister, she who had received all of those blessings, lived with her husband, her firstborn, and their many children after that. Happy, happy, happy. And that is the end of that story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jan. That was a grisly end. But I loved it. Lovely. Thank you ever so much, Jan. I could listen to you telling stories all day. Just gorgeous. So thank you ever so much. And thank you for being a part of Lit again. We love having you here in Macclesfield virtually, and hopefully next year physically, which would be wonderful. So thank you ever so much, Jan. Your stories are wonderful.
Thank you, Diana. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.